Hello, guys. How are you guys doing? All good?
Pretty well.
Happy days.
Yep.
Listen, really good to see so many connecting in live already. Brilliant to have you with us. I don't know where you are. I don't know what way your life is with all the restrictions at the minute, but it's still a great thing to focus in on God for a few minutes and just really get excited about all that He's doing in these days. So it's fantastic to have a couple of friends in tonight, people who over the past few years have become really good friends of ours. And I'm going to introduce them in a second. But I just would ask you, if you are watching this already, then take a minute and share this out. If you're not a Christian, especially, then this is for you. If you are a Christian, it's for your friends. So share it out, and let's just really bring some hope and some grace and some peace and love and life and all of the other things that Jesus brings to everybody who
Hmm.
sees this. So yeah, Neil, how you doing, bro?
I'm good, John. Thank you.
Good. Listen,
Thanks for
introduce
the
yourself.
invitation.
Brilliant. Introduce yourself and tell us a wee bit about all you're up to at the minute.
Yeah, well, John has impressively put my name across the bottom there, so I'm Neil Dawson. He's taking away my thunder. I'm Neil Dawson. I'm living in Rich Hill, born and bred in Rich Hill, County Armagh, and I absolutely love where I live. So grateful for the place that God has placed me in, and I'm so grateful for who He's placed me with. So I'm married to Judith, and we have 5 kids. So there's 7 people. There's been 7 people in our since the middle of March. We have 3 birth kids. We adopted our youngest one a number of months back, and then we've been fostering a teenager since, as I say, since the beginning of March. So it's a full house, lots of activity, and on top of that, we lead Grace Community Church with a few others. Have the privilege of leading alongside some really good friends. Again, right in the heart of Rich Hill, we meet in an old pub that closed down a couple of years ago, and so we decided that we would move our church there, as we long to be an expression of the good news of Jesus right in the heart of Rich Hill. So yeah, done enough. Is that all right?
Fantastic. I've just had a wee message, Neil. If possible, maybe headphones. There seems to be a wee bit of
Oh,
background.
really?
Awesome.
Okay.
Shay, all the way from London. It's brilliant to have you on tonight having a chat.
Hiya.
And so yeah, tell us a wee bit about yourself and some of the stuff you've been up to recently.
Yeah, so as John said, my name is Shay Clark. I'm from East London. I attend City Gates Church, and up until a month ago, I was heading up missions and evangelism there, or outreach. And now I'm currently working in South London as a youth and community worker. And I also run a ministry called Heart for the Hood, which really encourages people to love their local community. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Awesome. One thing, folks, we are live, okay? There's always some interesting stuff when we go live. But yeah, so awesome. Awesome. So yeah, it's tonight we're just going to have a conversation about the whole concept of the simple reality that Jesus was a revolution in humanity. Now we know that Jesus was fully God, 100% God. He was also 100% human, okay? And so we can relate to him, number one, because he's fully God and he completely understands us. And secondly, because he is fully human and he totally gets everything that we have to go through. And so, just to give 2 minutes, just a quick nutshell. Jesus was born into a time when there was a really particular form of culture. In fact, there was two separate cultures. If you're listening from Northern Ireland, you'll maybe understand that a wee bit. But there's these two separate cultures. There was the Jewish culture and there was the Roman culture, and it was pagan, if you like. And so, in all of that, Jesus came to really what was a divided society and brought hope and life to both sections. So, to give just a quick nutshell of what those two cultures were. In Jewish culture, and there seems to be a wee bit of feedback. Shay, if you have any volume turned up or anything, if you could just turn that down, please. If there's anything actually outside of your earphones, that'll be brilliant. But yeah, so I'm gonna try putting mine in as well, and then we will get there. Well, so Jesus came, and the Jewish culture, they really struggled to understand how anybody with imperfections could really represent a perfect holy God, how they could reflect a perfect and holy God. So people with imperfections weren't allowed into the temple to worship there. They weren't allowed into homes because they saw the temple as having been desecrated by the Romans. They very often treated their homes like mini temples, and so they didn't allow any imperfections often into their homes as well. So that's why we read about people left to beg in the streets, and things like that. So there was this culture where people weren't really, all people weren't really seen as having worth. Okay? And then you had the pagan culture, the Roman culture. And so it was far more extreme in that sense. If a baby was born with some kind of disability, the baby was left to die. Sometimes in the rubbish heap outside the town. If a boy was even wanted, but a girl was born, the baby would have been left to die because it just would have been disregarded. If people reach a certain age and it was seen as if their usefulness wasn't there anymore, they would then have been maybe brought to the edge of a cliff, and there was a pagan tradition where there would have been an incantation, a ritual, and then the people would have jumped over the edge of the cliff or whatever, and all because they didn't want to be a burden to their family. So people didn't have worth in the same way as we would understand. But Jesus came to that culture with real love for every individual. We constantly read in the Gospels of him healing the beggars, and even being with the lepers and not worried about what people thought, but he just brought hope and love and life. And so he brings this culture of acceptance. He welcomes women and children. He does all of this stuff, and he goes after the marginalized. He comes to bring love and life to every person and to bring communities together. And so this was just a profound thing. An absolutely profound thing. So, as Jesus came with love for everybody, he brought this simple acceptance to beggars and lepers and to women and children, and he was actually the first one. And I'm going to open this up now to the guys to chat. But he was the first one to bring a true teaching of equality, something we hear a lot about these days. But Jesus was the first one to teach on equality, and so we're going to take a look through a lot of this stuff. But what's the first thing comes to your minds when you think of what Jesus brought and how he came?
I think for me, sort of the first sort of biblical story, or the first time you really see, I can think of that you really see this out, is in John 4. So in John chapter 4, Jesus is asking a Samaritan woman for a drink of water. And just in that context, Jewish men, Jewish people, but Jewish men especially, one, didn't speak to women, but two, didn't speak to Samaritan women, just because there was just conflict between those two people groups. And when Jesus asks the woman to draw her, in the NLT, So in a translation of the Bible, it says that the woman was surprised, for Jews normally refuse to have anything to do with a woman, and she questioned that. And I feel like right at the beginning of that is that Jesus is actually having a level playing field um, with the woman, with who is Samaritan. And I think that's the first sort of time I've seen equality in the Bible, really, that equal rights between men and women. So yeah.
Perfect. Can you hear me? Is that better now, John? I can't hear you.
I can't hear you, John.
Give me a thumbs up, John, if you want me to keep going. Yeah. Yeah, it's a perfect example that she has given there. For me, we have over the last 6 weeks we've been back in our church building now for the last 6 weeks, and really strongly felt that we wanted to go through the Sermon on the Mount, in particular the Beatitudes. So for me, I think to answer the question, maybe not so much like one specific moment, but I think big picture, like what Jesus is doing on this mountain is incredibly significant. Because I don't think we realize that who Jesus is speaking to are, as you've already alluded to, John, are the most overpowered, oppressed, marginalized people. And so what Jesus is coming and what he is saying to these people is actually good news for a people that all they'd ever known was bad news, had been inundated, their lives had been inundated with bad news. Like what Jesus is communicating here on the sermon, this famous Sermon on the Mount, is remarkably good news for people who've all they've known is to be overlooked, to be marginalized, to be oppressed. And Jesus, and then so that was for me, that was a key moment, because then that's then the illustration. That's the illustration then for the rest of Jesus's life. And we see him constantly defending the marginalized, constantly looking out for the overpowered and the oppressed. And so I think what takes place on that mount is incredibly significant for how then Jesus lives out the rest of his life, or the rest of his ministry life, as we read through the rest of the Gospels.
So yeah, Jesus came with this attitude, with this new heart for people, and he just began to change mindsets and to make a real difference. And he came, and the big thing that he brought was this passion for people. Why? Simply because they were created in the image of God. They had priceless worth and deserved to be treated equally. And so that really made an impact in society in so many different ways. But we see him with the marginalized, with the disabled. And he was the first person to teach equality. And so what difference does that make, guys? What really stands out about that mindset? How important is it today? What's your thoughts?
Go on ahead, Shay.
Oh no.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, you go first.
Well, again, to go big picture stuff, if that's all right. But what I love about, because there's so much in the scriptures, isn't there, that we see differently. Like we all have different ideas, different preferences when it comes to certain reading of scripture. But I am 100% convinced that there's 2 or 3 threads that run throughout the whole of scripture, and one of them is how we treat the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. And so I think that is really important for us to always be holding on to, because it never seems to change from the Old Testament right through to the ministry of Jesus and beyond. The test of our faith, the test of our Christ-likeness seems to be how we treated the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. And so and so as well, like hospitality was a big theme. That was another one of those threads that runs right through the scripture. And I love that. I love what that word hospitality means. I think the Greek for it is xenophilia, which means love for stranger. And so I think that is
Wow.
it's a beautiful challenge for us. It's a real challenge for us, because I think sometimes when we think of hospitality, we sometimes think about having the neighbor that looks like us, that sounds like us, that believes all the same things as us, having them around for dinner. And that's the extent of our hospitality. But I think the biblical idea of hospitality is looking after the orphan, the widow, and the stranger, and actually welcoming them into our home. The love of stranger. And just because we're on Matthew, 5, it's where I am constantly over the last number of weeks. But at the end of Matthew 5, Jesus does say, "If you love only those who love you, what reward will you get?"
Mm-hmm.
Like even the tax collectors do that. But the challenge for those of us that are following Jesus, that are living this kingdom way, is more than that. It's like, if you're only greeting your brothers, well, what are you doing more than anybody else? And so it's this love of the other, it's this love of stranger, that I think is the thread that runs right throughout Scripture from beginning to end. So again, I'm aware that I'm presenting big picture stuff here, but I think that's important. I think, as we continue to set the context for the
Absolutely.
conversation.
And Jesus, the whole way through his ministry, he modeled this stuff. He always welcomed people. He always led others to welcome people. And that really took root even in the early church. In the letters of the New Testament, just out walking today, and I was listening to some scripture, and I love to just, it's great just to listen to scripture as well. And so listening to Titus, and one of the things that an elder had to do was to have an open house. And they wanted to leave elders in each town to grow the work and to do all of that and to worship God. But one of the things, they had to be filled with a heart for hospitality, and so it's one of the things we probably find difficult in these COVID days, because we can't really do that in the same way. And yeah, it gets really interesting. It gets really, really interesting. But that heart has to be there, and Jesus did that. He always welcomed people as they came to him, even the lepers that were outcast, that people were worried. And there's something for us in these days. They were always worried about catching what they had, and Jesus had this heart just to embrace the lepers, even though they were outcast in society, to embrace them, and even to sacrifice his reputation to just love these guys, and even to bring healing to them. And we read so much about the lepers, but you could contextualize that in so many ways for our generation. But he just had this sense of sacrificial servanthood. And that's a beautiful and a profound thing. And so compassion to the people that society shunned was always a really central part of that. And Shay, what's your thoughts on that? Have you experienced that even in ministry or in community? What's your thoughts?
Sorry, it cut out. Have I experienced compassion?
Yeah, just that heart of Jesus being manifest in our generation.
Is it? Sorry, I think my sound's cut out. Hold on. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me okay? Yeah, listen, I'll let you work away with that for a second. I'm sure we can come back to you. But yeah, so Jesus, he just has this heart for sacrificial servitude, and it's been great even over the COVID experience to see the church coming alive and a lot of that stuff, and beginning to show compassion to their community and the people who are maybe self-isolating or whatever. It's been beautiful just to see the church take the example of Jesus to heart, and begin to love people, and provide resources for people who need it, and all of that. But in those days, sacrificial servitude was seen as something that was quite silly. You were indebted to someone if you showed any kind of gratitude. It was seen as weakness to serve others, especially people who were lower down the classes, or who were, seen as outcasts or whatever. But to serve them, and ultimately to do what Jesus done, to actually give himself for them, it was seen as such a contradiction Weakness was never a strength. But Jesus came and he changed that whole culture, and the humility that he had was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. Neil, how important is that?
Yeah, just as you're talking, I can't help but listening. I think you've said a lot of stuff there that could have jumped on. But just as you were wrapping up those thoughts, you can't help but think of Philippians 2.
Yeah.
They're like, where else can you turn to apart from Philippians 2 when it comes to that idea that you're talking about?
Yeah.
And I think obviously there's loads of places we could go to, but I love how Paul puts it in Philippians, where Jesus, like, he had every reason to hold on to all of his divinity, but he decided to count himself as nothing, take on the nature of a servant, and some of that language is so beautiful, and even how Paul starts out, how he sets that, what Jesus does as a challenge for us is, this is the attitude that you are also to have. Be like Jesus, who considered himself as nothing, took on whatever reputation people wanted to throw at him. And I think that is important. I think what you've touched on, John, a few minutes ago,
Yeah.
that willingness to be able to lay aside reputation.
Yeah.
And Jesus continually did that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Because he was so willing to serve anyone. Like, there was nobody beyond his reach. There was nobody that he wanted to miss out on his kindness and his compassion. And so if it meant lifting up, taking off his outer garment and lifting up his towel and washing the feet
Yeah.
of the most unruly and unlikely and difficult and distracted and awkward, painful men, that, like, Jesus did that incredibly well, didn't he?
Yeah. And you mentioned that verse in Philippians too, and I think it's verse 4. Um, like, I love the way the Message Bible puts this, and it's quite blunt but so important. It says, "Forget about yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand."
Very good.
I love that. And Shay, I know your tech is working again. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think in regards to Jesus being compassionate, and just on the back of Neil when he was sharing the bigger picture, thinking of stories in the Bible, because one of the things I love doing is looking at what Jesus done in the Bible and actually think, how does that relate to me, or what would it be like if I was there? And just two stories just come to mind. The first one being Zacchaeus, who was he in culture he was a Roman tax collector, and Jewish people hated him. He was also short, and I don't know why that's in the Bible, but it's there, and that's more, I think, to do with the whole Jewish culture. But so Zacchaeus climbed up on a tree to meet with Jesus, and Jesus had compassion with him and called him down and ate with him. We also see the woman, the prostitute woman, the woman with the alabaster jar, like a big jar of perfume, who, as Jesus is sitting down and eating with these religious leaders, she comes in, breaks the vase, and starts just pouring perfume on his feet and crying. And people around him were saying, why is Jesus doing that? But Jesus saw the need of the person, saw the heart of the person, and was like, no, this is my daughter, and was really pleased with her. And I think that's something that I love, because I think Neil was saying it. Jesus breaks all cultural boundaries to encounter or to meet with people. But also you see in the life of Jesus, whenever he performed a miracle, in Matthew's account of the gospel, it always says Jesus was moved with compassion, and then he healed. Then
Yeah.
he fed 5,000 people. Then he went whatever. And I think that at the time, and even now, it's so revolutionary, because he done everything out of love. And how much more for us as humans do we have to do things out of love?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of
Very
my
good.
thoughts on those sorts of.
The amazing thing is, people just seem to get his heart. when they were in his presence, when they connected with him. And, I love some of the things that you guys are saying there. When Jesus walked into a town, the whole atmosphere just changed. I think of the time when he was walking. It says that he was walking and he had a crowd with him, and he went into a city called Nain. And the first thing that happened was they run into this other crowd. It was a funeral, and this woman's only son had died, and so it's an interesting topic for Northern Ireland. But these two processions met, and
Careful.
but the result was like when the church, for example, when Jesus' followers go into community, it's a typology. Every time we go into community, we see suffering, we see all the effects of sin. But when Jesus entered that community, almost immediately there was just this sense of hope, and he stopped at the coffin and raised the young man back to life, and there was just this sense of hope, of expectation when Jesus entered a town or entered a room or entered any kind of space. And so he just continually brought the heart of the Father, the atmosphere of the kingdom, and just love, because he was love in person. And so whenever he entered into community, you see things like, people climbing trees to get a glimpse of him. People breaking apart their life savings in an alabaster box just to anoint him, and to bless him. You have people ripping holes in roofs just to get their mates into his presence so he could bring hope to them and heal them and all of that. And he just had this massive ability to just connect with the hearts of people and to make a difference. And very often that was supernatural. And he's still the same today. He loves to impact situations. And so many people these days, like, I think it was last week, there was something like 37 suicides in Northern Ireland. But the thing that he loves to do is to bring hope. The thing that he loves to do is just to fill a room with his presence and to bring healing. The Bible says that he's the wonderful counselor. He's the it means miraculous. He isn't someone who can just speak hope and truth into our lives. He loves to supernaturally touch hearts and to actually bring people to a place where they are focused on hope, where they're focused on their future and all of that. And he just is an amazing person. He's such an amazing person to do life with. He's such an amazing person to receive direction and correction when necessary from. He's just such an amazing person to love and to be in relationship with. And he wants us to be in relationship with him. But even though he was God in the flesh, he just came with this heart of humility. I love a really good movie, and the hero giving himself for the people in distress or whatever. But in the culture that Jesus came from, that was seen as weak, but he gave himself. Any thoughts on that, guys, or on that whole concept?
Just the idea of I think the idea of giving of himself. I'm maybe just picking up some of the other stuff that you were talking about there, John. I hope it's not going off.
Go for it.
I don't think it is. But just as you're talking there passionately about what you're talking about, I think that people didn't second guess. I think they knew when Jesus stepped into the moment, into the environments, they knew that they were loved. Yeah. And sometimes my challenge as a church leader is are we more concerned with being right? Are we more concerned with letting people know what we think about their sin? Are we more concerned with letting people know where they're going wrong than we are with actually just showing how loved they truly are, how valued they truly are? And I'm so challenged by that. And I think it's a really important conversation for us as followers of Jesus. I think it's an important conversation for us as a church. What are you more concerned about as you step into environments with people who don't think the same as you do? Are you more concerned with being right, or is your priority to show love? Because I think what Jesus showed was that mercy triumphs over judgment. Yeah. And I think that's what James articulated. And I think Jesus lived that out consistently, was that mercy triumphs over judgment. And so it seems to me like the woman that was caught in the act of adultery, and we could keep on with all of these stories. I love all the stories that we're bringing up from the scriptures that just show over and over again that Jesus could have went straight to judgment, which honestly, I think I would have. I think my default is judgment. And I look at the life of Jesus, and I think that woman knew immediately she was loved. And then that changed everything else. That changed the trajectory because she knew that she was loved. And so I think that like the reality is that does take a
Yeah.
certain level of humility. Like you need to be willing to say, well, I'm not stepping into this to show where I'm right and they're wrong. I'm stepping into this because the one judgment that I do know, the one judgment that I can agree on, is that they are of unsurpassable worth. That in the eyes of Jesus, they are of infinite value. That he went, like the one thing that we can agree on is that they were worth him going to the cross for.
Yeah.
And so all of the other judgments that we have need to be laid aside for us to
Yeah.
ultimately, first of all, show love. And I think that's difficult. That's a challenge for me because there's a certain vulnerability, there's a certain letting go of your own ideas and your own ideologies, your own theologies, your own preferences, in order to make this commitment that first of all I'm going to be like Jesus and show them that I care, show them that I love them no matter what. And so I hope that didn't take it off on a tangent, John, but that
No,
was just
not
some
at
of
all.
the thoughts as you were talking there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's so good, Neil. And even just to add to that, I think just how do I bring that challenge of Jesus being compassionate and so humble and seeing past judgment or seeing past the wrongs of people. How do I live that out? And I can just think where I'm based now. I've spent 3 or 4 years just in church, really among Christians. So people's standard of living is very similar to mine.
Yeah.
And I've gone back into community now where people are swearing left, right, and center. They're doing things that I'm not used to. And as a Christian, do I say, oh no, I'm a Christian, don't smoke in front of me or don't swear in front of me? Or do I embrace them where they're at?
Yeah.
Humble myself in essence, embrace them where they're at and journey with them. So
Very
if
good.
you culturally, if you're swearing to explain excitement, go for it. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm seeing past what's there just to love on you. Because when Jesus made this person or the people that I'm in, he made them in his image, in love, with worth.
Yeah.
And I think that's my duty as a Christian to reflect that. And I think, looking at the time Jesus was in and how people saw humans, how people, we spoke about it earlier, the difference between cultures and society. And even now we're seeing it in the news with all what's happened over the last few months in regards to the whole Black Lives Matter movement and just racial inequality. In a sense, how do I reflect that as a Christian? Am I seeing people not because of what they do or their skin color, but because they're made in the image of God?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Can I love this person because who they really come from, whether they know it or not? I mean, I think that's what Jesus has taught me to do. And not just me, but followers of him, which means, we had a saying at my church, come as you are, you'll never leave the same. And that's simply, that's a biblical principle, which is saying, here, as you are right now, come. Don't worry about, so in sort of in London, well, church culture back in the day, you have to dress smart and stuff like that. And some churches are still like that, but in my church in particular, we can wear whatever we want. And I think that's the beauty of, hey, come, just dress how you want, be how you want. But just know once you encounter Jesus, your life will change.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so I say that to say that his compassion and his humility has transformed how myself as a Christian and how the early church, how humans see people, how followers of Christ see people. So yeah.
Oh, brilliant! I love that. Sorry to jump in, John, but that is beautiful. I'm so moved by that, Shay. It's really good. And just as you were speaking, just reminds me, just as I was praying before coming on to this conversation, I think one of the questions I found myself just asking with this idea of and you reminded me of it just as you were talking about those made in his image. And I've asked myself this question: can we see the image of God in those that we most passionately disagree with? That's real. It's really difficult.
Yeah.
But just with this question, that these thoughts that John has posed over the last couple of days, can I see the image of God even in those I most passionately disagree with? And so, like, that's really challenging, isn't it?
And Jesus taught so much about that stuff. And,
It is.
you know, even the Sermon on the Mount, you know, love your enemies.
Mm.
Like, my goodness, I don't think there's anything that goes more against the grain of humanity than that comment, that teaching. And so that was what Jesus, that's the way he lived. He embraced everybody. You know, where there even were sectarian or racial divides, he brought truth and hope and love and life into the heart of that. He went to the woman at the
Yes.
well in John chapter 4, and he embraced that Samaritan community, even though the Jews and the Samaritans didn't really get on. It wasn't important to him. The only thing that was important, that individuals who were all made in the image of God, who were all of priceless worth, the only thing that mattered to him was that he began to build a relationship with them. But that's what he is and has always been and always will be passionate about. And
Sorry,
so,
John, do you think just whenever Jesus selected his disciples, do you think he purposely selected those that were on the opposite ends of the social divide and those that were the opposite end of the political divide? Just think like Matthew the tax collector and these
Yes.
fishermen on the opposite ends of the social divide, and then you've got Simon the Zealot and like those that wanted to kill Simon the Zealot, that were in the same, I can't remember which disciple it was, but they were in the same group of people. And I think Jesus was showing right from the selection of his disciples, there's a way for you to follow
Yes.
Jesus together from right across the social and political divides. And that's especially for us here, that's a big question, isn't it?
It's profound, and I joke about this sometimes. And Simon the Zealot was in the IRA, he was in the Israeli Republican Army. They were looking to kick the Romans out, but then you had Simon the tax collector who didn't mind working with the Romans, and so these political opposing opinions, the social classes were different, and he wanted to bring people. All that other stuff was secondary, and he just wanted to bring people into relationship with himself, and he did. And those 12 he used to change the world. And like, my goodness, it's profound, but it takes a unique person to be able to do that, and he did it, and he did it beautifully. And so his teaching and his example dramatically impacted the world. It impacted Jerusalem and Galilee as he was on this earth, and we've talked about that with the 12. Even this motley crew of people from all kinds of backgrounds. But this whole concept that everybody had worth, that everybody was to be loved, that everybody was to be brought together in Christ to worship and to do life together and to obey the Great Commission together in the days of the early church. Those things really, really impacted world history. And so whenever you think about Jesus and this sacrificial humility and servitude that he's shown, as his teaching and his example took root in his followers, the Western world was changed. We know that very shortly after a very difficult time of persecution, about a few hundred years later, we'll fast forward, the early church began to really live out the teaching of Jesus and the principles of Jesus. They called it the way of Jesus, and they began to live this out. And very often that looked like maybe a city was coming down with a plague. As everybody was running to the hills, the Christians were moving in to care for the people. They had this passion of this compassion just to look after and serve people. But it was all because people were worth. They had worth. It was all because Jesus loved people and because of the way he lived and exampled. The Western world really was changed. And as things developed, things were added into society on the back of Jesus' teaching. And we still have a lot of those things today. So I think it would be great even just to touch on some of those things. The first thing comes to mind is the whole concept of hospitals. Now, it was Christian people in the beginning who started hospitals. Now, in times like these that we're living in now, in the COVID world, and especially in the UK, we have the NHS. We have to realise that we wouldn't actually have that stuff. That mindset would never have been part of our culture had it not been for the teaching of Jesus. That's a pretty profound thought. The way that he embraced women and children has dramatically impacted how women and children have been treated ever since. I mean, Neil, something I know is really passionate in your heart is this concept of embracing children and becoming a father to the fatherless and all of that stuff. And again, Jesus was born into a culture that really didn't have any kind of occurring culture for those who were disabled or rejected or the fatherless or whatever. And he came and he brought that, and he actually rebuked his own followers for not letting the children come to him and all of that. He set an amazing example, and something really close to your heart is fostering and adoption. Do you want to share a wee bit just on the heart of Christ behind that?
How long for?
I know you could talk about this all night.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, it goes right back to that thread that I mentioned at the beginning. Like, I think, his like the test of whether we've understood him or not is how we look after those that are on the margins and those that are vulnerable. And so for me, my heart is and the experiences that we've had is that there's very few people as vulnerable as the children in our care system. And so for me, the challenge is for me, the reality is that all of us have a responsibility as followers of Jesus to those that are on the margins. Yeah. And so, but by me saying that, I'm not saying that everybody has to foster and everybody has to adopt. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think we all have a responsibility. Like, I think what Jesus says in Matthew 25 is for us all. How you've looked after the least of these, you've done it. You've done it for me. And so for me, the challenge is that the numbers are increasing, like right across the trusts in Northern Ireland, is that the numbers of children that are going into care for various reasons. Like I think we're aware of the challenges around drugs, addictions, mental health, and all of that, and so we are seeing an increase in the amount of kids that end up in the care system. The challenge for the church, I think, is that as much as the numbers of kids are increasing, the numbers of people coming forward to extend their tables and open up their homes is not increasing at the same rate. And I think if there's anybody that needs to step in to fill the gap, it has to be the church. And so again, the challenge for me as a church leader and the challenge to church leaders is, again, if not saying that you have to open your home, but it has to be on your radar. It has to be something that you're casting out the challenge and the responsibility to those that are following Jesus. And so yeah, so simple things for me are really important. Like, I love, one of the things I love about being a dad is, and probably especially over COVID, is that I've had the joy of being able to bring my kids to school every day and being able to pick them up from school every day. And honestly, it breaks my heart. Like, I could get emotional if I thought long enough about the amount of kids that don't have somebody standing at the school gates to pick them up, don't have somebody cheering them on at their school sports day, don't have someone to help them through their homework, and there's just too many kids that are in that space, and so over lockdown we opened our home to a teenage girl, and it hasn't been without its challenges, huge challenges actually, but we just recognize someone that has been starved of affection and starved of the value and the worth and all of that stuff that we're talking about. You begin to see that, like, it's not just theory that we're talking about here. That, like, actually, whenever you see the impact it has on somebody believing that they have no value and no worth, like, whenever you see that before your very eyes, you can't ignore it. Like, you can no longer walk away from it. And so I think that changes things. It changes things in our church. Once people begin to come face to face with the reality, once they come face to face with a child that is in care, they're not a monster. They're not terrible. They just need someone to champion them. They just need someone to love them. And my conviction is that there's no one better placed, and there is no one that should be more willing and ready to respond than the church.
Yeah. It's just something, Neil, and I've talked with you, and I know your wife has spoken about it publicly as well, and it's just something that, for me, you just see the heart of Christ in you guys as you do that, and I have friends who have been in that process as well, and they haven't found it an easy process at all. But they found it such a rewarding thing, and again, it's just one of the things that we see the heart of Christ in, is something that he has a heart to continue to do through his church, and just to care for the vulnerable, to care for the unloved, to bring again his love and his life to people who need him the most, and that's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah, and it's just as Shay was saying there, like what fight are you going to take? And so that can be easy to sort of like point out the wrong that people are doing outside your doors. But see, whenever it's when in your own home, you're left with a decision like are we going to judge? Are we going to criticize? Are we going to point out fault? Are we going to commit ourselves to loving? And we are convinced that it's actually in committing ourselves to loving really well, that's where transformation is going to come. I don't think transformation is going to come by us continually pointing out where she's gone wrong. And maybe this is going too spiritual, but the reality is that I think what we're seeing in our experience fostering is, I think, something of what Paul talked about when he said, 1 Corinthians 4, that you have so many guardians. You've had so many people telling you what to do, so many people telling you what's right and what's wrong, but actually what you've missed out is fathers and mothers. Yeah. And so we think that is our responsibility. We think that is the responsibility of the church, that there will be fathers and mothers to love and to shepherd and to care for those that have only ever known what it's like to have someone telling them what they've done wrong and where they've went wrong.
Profound stuff. And Jesus, he always seemed to bring this heart and this attitude of affirmation to the people who were
absolutely
downcast, and all of those things. Yeah, it just is such a challenging thing. And Jesus, he brought so many other aspects to his community through his life. And again, all of these were a knock-on effect of people being treasured, people being of priceless worth and deserving to be cared for, etc. And so, again, there you have the whole adoption, foster care, orphanages, and all of that. They all came in the earliest times from Christian people who were following the heart of Christ. Another thing was the homes for the elderly. Again, began by Christians. So many things that we have in the Western world, and so many things that we see being highlighted at the minute. There's such a difficult vocation at the minute to be caring for people in a nursing home environment. Such a challenge. And I know many Christian people. One person I know well has a couple of nursing homes, and I'm sure it's so challenging for them at the minute. But again, following Jesus cares for the vulnerable and the marginalised. But another few things as well, that, because people were worthy or, deserved to be cared for and treated equally and everything else, it was actually Christians that began to educate the masses as well. And so it was Christians who began to do school. It was early Christians that began to ignite the universities and all of the things in society that we treasure so much. So many of them came from early Christians simply following the teaching of Jesus. And so the simple, and we're going to probably begin to wrap up because of our few wee technical differences there. We've went on a wee bit longer, or technical difficulties. We've went on a wee bit longer than expected, but there's just been so many things that, from the heart of Christ, because people were seen as having worth, were brought into the very heart of society. So the social welfare, all that whole system was inspired by Christians in the earliest days, in the beginnings. Democracy was inspired because everyone's voice was valued, and so again, the message of Christ was at the heart of all of that. We've talked about quite a bit of stuff, but just to hone in, what we really want to try and get across tonight is this Jesus, who is so misunderstood in our generation, was a man who was an absolute revolution in humanity. He loved people. He loved society. He loved communities. He wanted people to experience the Father's heart. And he was a visible, tangible expression of the Father's heart. And so he just wants to draw people into that. And so we want you to know Jesus. Because he's stereotyped in so many ways, and Netflix put on programs making fun of him and all that sort of stuff. But when you begin to understand who the real, authentic Jesus is, he is contagious. And when you find out who he really is, you can't stay away from him because he is amazing. Any thoughts just on Jesus before we wrap up, guys? Anything you really want to say from your heart about what it means to know him?
I think for me, knowing Jesus, there's so much I can say, but it's life-changing. And I'm not saying that just because it sounds good, but he has tremendously changed my life, down to just my own self-worth, my own belief. I think if I never started following Jesus at the age that I did, I don't think I would have achieved or done half the things I have done in my short amount of time on earth. And I think that's key. It truly is life-changing. When, like I said earlier, when Jesus literally takes you as you are, and transforms your life, that's what he done for me. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Fantastic.
Yeah, John, I think you've already alluded to it there. That one of the greatest revelations for me, probably embarrassing that it took so long, but like one of the most beautiful moments I had was reading through the words of Jesus in the Gospels, where he says, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." And I love that, because I was probably at a place where you can sometimes wrestle with, what is God like? Like, is God this angry, vengeful God that is out to get me? But thank goodness that Jesus got in his way. That is wrong. And I hope that, like, anybody listening, like, please, that is not what God is like. If you want to see what God is like, look at Jesus. And so the thing that is remarkable for me, and honestly, we've told enough stories, and we've hardly even touched the surface of all that he did in the Gospels. Never mind what he continues to do. But I love that he came to show us what God is truly like. One who is full of mercy, full of kindness and compassion. Yeah. I love that he came, especially in Luke's Gospel. I love watching Jesus in Luke's Gospel because he's always around a table. He's always around. He's either going to a table, he's either coming from a table, or he's at a table. And that's good for someone who likes food. I love that that's where Jesus hangs out, and he hangs out with anybody. There's no one that he will not encounter and love and shower his love and mercy on. But not only does he show us what God is like, but he also came to show us how we should look at other people. And so I love that. And again, in Luke, there's a few moments in Luke, I think it's Luke 7 and Luke 8, where actually Jesus he gets the woman in Luke 7 and says, "Do you see this woman?" And then the woman with the issue of blood in Luke chapter 8, he brings her out because he wants them valued, he wants them validated. And he even does it because there was nobody looked down on more than the women and the children. And Jesus over again, he brings the woman out and he says, "Do you see this woman?" And then he does the same with the children. He brings the child out right into the midst of them all. He says, "Like, do you see this child? Unless you receive the kingdom like a little child, you're not going to get it." And so I love that Jesus shows us what God is truly like. And then in light of that, I love how he also comes to show us how we then need to look at other people. And I think once we begin to look at people through the eyes of Jesus, like, it's going to make a difference. It has to.
Yeah.
If I can get it, if I can see the image of God in everyone, if I can see them how He truly sees them, that has to make an impact on how we engage with those around us.
Love it. And so the
good.
simple reality is this: Jesus is God. Okay? He's fully God. Right now, he's seated at the right hand of the Father, having been given authority over the heavens and the earth. Okay? But he is also 100% human. And he was a revolution in humanity. And so he came to this world to pour out the love of the Father on every one of us. And so the best thing that we can possibly do is to begin to explore him. Look at him. Download YouVersion, the Bible app, to your phone. You don't even have to buy anything, okay? Download it to your phone. Go out for a walk, put your headphones in, and listen to the Gospels. Listen to the stories of Jesus. Listen to the things that he did, and know that everything he did, he still does and can still do. And very often he even does that through his church. But he wants you to experience his heart. He wants you to experience his love, his grace, his forgiveness. And so the simple truth is this: there's no one else who has ever lived who is like Jesus. Next week we are going to be talking about just the simple reality that Jesus is totally and completely unique. Much of that centers around the resurrection, but he is totally and completely unique. He is God, and he loves us, and he wants to be in relationship with us. And the next time you see the needs in society, whether it's medical staff, whether it's the orphanages, the homes for the elderly, the schools, the universities, democracy, all of the things we have in the Western world, all of it began with the teaching of Jesus Christ, because he was a revolution in humanity. And so, bless you guys. Thanks for coming on. We're a wee bit longer than expected tonight with some of the technical issues, but we are live. It's a reality. We are not professionals. We just get on. Amen. So
Good
great to
man.
have you on tonight, guys. And remember to tune in next week, guys, and we'll be
Thank you for
having a
having us.
conversation about Jesus and the uniqueness of who he was, and ultimately the resurrection. God bless you.